All right, welcome everyone. My name's Ed Davis. I'm a solutions consultant here at CloudFactory. So one aspect of my role is to evaluate our clients' requirements and recommend the best tool for the job. And today I have the privilege of speaking with Ivan Lee, CEO of Datasaur. Datasaur is located in Livermore, California, and is a leader in natural language processing, and especially in the data labeling side of NLP. For those not familiar with NLP, natural language processing is a branch of artificial intelligence that helps computers understand, interpret, and manipulate human language. We're grateful to Ivan for taking the time to be with us this afternoon. Good afternoon, Ivan.
Afternoon, Ed. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you. So for those watching who may not be familiar with Datasaur, can you give us a bit of a background?
Yeah, of course. So I'll perhaps start with a little bit of my own history for context.
Sure.
So I've been a product manager for AI for the last decade at a number of different companies. Most recently, I was at Apple, where I helped spend hundreds of millions of their dollars labeling data. And what I had discovered was there were a lot of tools focused for computer vision. But when it came to text, even with all of our resources, we were still using spreadsheets to label a good deal of this data. And nobody seemed to be building the tool I wish existed. And so I left the company and I started Datasaur to build precisely those tools. So for the last 3 years, we've been working on creating the best software possible for labeling text and audio data.
Could you maybe give us a little bit of background about Y-Combinator? For those who don't know, Y-Combinator is a venture capital firm for early stage startups. They've funded a number of innovative companies such as Airbnb, Instacart, and Dropbox. And Ivan, I understand you had your humble beginnings at Y-Combinator.
Yeah. It was a great experience. So about a year into the company, we had built an early MVP and we were looking to scale out our progress. On my side personally, I've been a consumer product manager, so I know how to build and design products, but I'd never actually done sales before. So going into YC, it actually helped me get started with selling to other businesses and figuring out how to frame and position our product.
That's great. And could you tell us about your recent acquisition of Konvergen AI? I suspect you needed to make a build or buy decision when it came to OCR. Could you give us a bit of a reason behind that acquisition?
Yeah, so this is a little bit fast forwarding through the company history, but we've been in operation now for 3 years. And in March of 2022, as you mentioned, we acquired a smaller AI company, Konvergen AI. The reason for this was that it was just a perfect match in terms of their expertise and what we really want, where we wanted to go with our product roadmap. We had spent the first 3 years of the company building the best text labeling solution in the industry. Where we want to go next is actually begin to focus on audio and OCR. The reason for this is because once you transcribe a PDF document into text, or you transcribe a customer service call into text, you can actually leverage all the text labeling capabilities we've already built out. So we think we're in a great position to start tackling these audio and OCR project types. Now, Konvergen brings with it a lot of OCR expertise and their own in-house algorithm for doing that transcription, but also comes with a whole lot of AI experts that will help us automate a lot of the work moving forward.
Got it. So part of your vision for the product then is to not only allow labeling within the text, but also kind of intelligently extracting that text from written documents or scanned documents.
That's right. Because what we had learned just talking to our customers is that they essentially would have for audio, for example, they would have Audacity in one window, a spreadsheet in another, and yet another text editor. And it was silly having these 3 windows open at all times and trying to manage that. So we saw an opportunity here to really simplify that experience and bring everything into one window.
That's great. Yeah, really exciting to hear about, those automation capabilities that you're bringing to the platform. So I want to pivot the conversation to the industry a bit. So I'd like to get your thoughts, Ivan, on NLP and the growth that's happening in both consumer and business applications. One question I had was, we're seeing a rise in technologies like chatbots, voice assistants, language translators, customer service seems to have really led the adoption on these technologies. Where else are you seeing demand grow for these technologies that maybe as consumers are not quite front and center?
Yeah, great question. So let me just take a step back for a moment here and just recognize that human is one of the key aspects that differentiates us as a human species, right? It really, it's a foundational element of our society and how we function. Now,
Hmm.
think about all the places where we're already using language to communicate with one another. It could be through calls like this, it could be through emails, customer service calls. Like there are all these ways where language is already a big part of everything that we do. Now, on the flip side, over the last 5 to 7 years, we've seen record after record being broken in NLP. Even in mainstream news, you'll hear that NLP is now able to score as well on the SAT as your average ninth grader, right? So I think if you combine these 2 points, we're perhaps underestimating the impact NLP is going to have on society as a whole. So in terms of specific technologies, we're seeing this being used in everywhere from the legal space and being able to label contracts and extract all this information automatically from that, through to healthcare, conversations between doctors and patients, and being able to summarize these, understand what are the symptoms, the illnesses, and the treatments that were used for that, and being able to find these patterns across thousands and millions of examples, right? So it's this really powerful technology that is really going to permeate pretty much every aspect of our lives by the end of this decade.
So as NLP technology continues to evolve to better understand the nuances, context, and ambiguities of human language, what are some of the challenges DataSore is facing to keep up?
Yeah. So what we're seeing are increasingly advanced product requirements. So I'll take a very basic example. Let's say we find a restaurant review online, and a lot of companies will want to just do basic sentiment analysis on that. Overall, was the review positive or negative?
Hmm.
But let's take an example where somebody says the food was great, but the line was way too long. Is that
Hmm.
overall positive or negative? It's a judgment call, right? So what we're starting to see NLP evolve to is being able to break that down using something called aspect-based sentiment analysis. So now you can say the food was great, and you want to draw a line between food and great in that sentence, and line and long in that sentence. So now you have a more nuanced understanding of what the customer is really saying, and that's much more pragmatic, right? All these Amazon reviews, all these e-commerce and restaurant reviews, it's much better to be able to understand the details of what a user is actually calling out. And so that's one thing where imagine trying to draw a relationship between those words in a spreadsheet. It's going to be very difficult. And what we've done is make it really easy to just draw an arrow from one word to another like you would in like a PowerPoint.
So we've been hearing a lot about GPT-3. To anyone who's mildly paying attention to the AI space, GPT-3 really made a big splash in the water when it was released. And I know this is, kind of catching the headlines, but I was curious, are there maybe other less well-known cutting edge research that has had a bigger impact on your product development?
Well, we are actually very grateful to OpenAI and GPT-3, partially because the CTO of OpenAI is actually an angel investor in Datasaur.
Oh,
So we
wow,
have
I
that
didn't
close
know that.
connection there. Yeah. Um, but also because the hype that surrounds each new OpenAI launch means that CEOs are starting to ask their R&D departments, what can we do with this technology, right? Transformers as a whole have unlocked a whole new set of opportunities for companies adopting NLP. And so, with CEOs allocating more and more budget towards automating work like this, because of the pandemic and all the work that needs to be automated, as we had difficulty staffing up a lot of places, we've seen rapid adoption of NLP. I'd go so far as to say I actually think that NLP is the most production ready of all the branches of AI. It's very neat seeing all the advances in computer vision, but in terms of practical uses, we've seen dozens of applications across many different industries in terms of real business advantages it can bring to these companies.
So we recently have had a customer who came to us to apply risk factor labels to entities within their documents. So the customer had pre-trained their model to identify entities, so people, organizations, private and public companies. But the customer needed CloudFactory to associate each entity with a risk factor. So we selected DataSore in this case because of its dynamic review capabilities and the real seamless interface that you guys have for labeling and applying risk factors to these entities. So this customer, given the potential for subjectivity, we needed to implement quality control measures and added reviewers to make sure we got the context correct. How is quality control driving your product roadmap? This, I guess, is a big need across the board. You need to have good data to feed these AI models. So quality control, I'm sure, is a big piece of your product development roadmap.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talk about our product from three core product pillars: the labeling interface itself, the ability to apply intelligence and automate away the work, and then the final piece is this workforce and quality management perspective. Now, a lot of people focus on the first two. That's like what immediately comes to mind when they think of labeling software. But this third component is actually really important because we have years of experience working with teams around the world in terms of how to set up these projects, in terms of best practices for the industry. And we also learn a great deal from partners such as yourselves in terms of how to set up a workflow that guarantees the best results coming out of it. So we've learned a lot from these existing use cases and through our partners in how to build our software to enforce those best practices. An example is there's a lot of subjectivity if a single person is labeling data. So instead, what a client might do is they'll assign you and me both, Ed, to label the exact same document. And we'll be labeling in a complete vacuum, right? DataSore sets it up so I can't view your answers, you can't view mine. And then the client just has to review, they don't have to review the entire document. They'll just review the areas where you and I disagreed. And that's built into the software itself and makes it really trivial to just look at, okay, here's where Ed and Ivan disagreed. Here's the 5 instances. Once I review those, I'm done. So we make it really easy for the project managers and the data scientists who run this project.
Right. And yeah, that kind of workflow with consensus and then the reviewer focusing on disagreement really kind of, while getting a diverse opinion on the subject, it also at the same time removes the need for kind of duplicate effort. So the reviewer isn't reviewing unnecessarily on labels that have agreement, but they're focusing on where there's disagreement. I can see how this could be really powerful in kind of enabling diversity in AI. So I know a big problem is trying to eliminate bias from these AI models, and I can see how DataSore really can support that unbiased data collection and data labeling.
Yes. It's something that I care deeply about on a personal level, and something that we try to educate our customers on and show them how to use our tool to set that up really simply.
That's great. So yeah, I wanted to turn to DataSore's offering. Talk a bit about the product. So could you, is there anything you'd like to show us that's a new feature or capability within DataSore?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we've spoken about the fact that we're getting into audio and OCR as well. Happy to share a quick demo of what an audio project looks like, because I think it really helps just visualizing exactly what a process like this, how it's enabled on DataSore.
That sounds great. We'd love to see it.
Excellent. So welcome to our audio demo here. This is a standard customer service call. What Datasore allows you to do is just go ahead and actually play that audio, because there's this transcription, but as we often know, speech to text can have issues. So you'll want to have access to the original audio and be able to listen to it, perhaps as you label.
So, is this customer service line?
Yes, thank you for calling.
So as I had mentioned earlier, a lot of customers currently have this in 3 different windows, with one audio player, one labeling window, and another notepad just for notes. So here you can see that it's all combined into a single interface. And what this allows you to do is just go ahead and select this entire span here and apply a label to that entire span. These numbers here correspond to keyboard shortcuts. So you can actually go through and apply these labels really quickly, depending on how soon you know what you want to be applying there. And it even supports more advanced capabilities, like the ability to draw a line from one thing to another if there's a relationship between those two entities. And you can even have overlapping labels like this, right? So what we wanted to do was create a really intuitive interface, because a lot of people might be first-time customers to this platform, and we want to make sure that they're up and running in under 5 minutes. But at the same time, we have a lot of powerful features under the hood that allow power users to get really efficient with this work, and also minimize errors and typos and things like that by just creating the most intuitive interface possible.
Very cool. Yeah, the gears are already turning. I've definitely gotten some audio use cases, and in the future, I'll definitely consider Datasore for these ones.
Thanks, Ed.
So I know Datasore can support both labeling documents and text from scratch, but you also support importing pre-labels. Do you find that pre-labeling can help improving efficiency? Or do you think, and do you think that's always the case? Is it always better to pre-label when you can, or is it sometimes better to, label from scratch?
No, absolutely. So I think we should absolutely take advantage of existing capabilities in NLP whenever possible. So for example, in my previous roles, it was really frustrating that we were spending time and money labeling basic concepts like Starbucks and Saturday and London from scratch. We know what those things are already. So we can go ahead and label all of those, everything that NLP already knows, and then our clients can just focus on the things that are really important and unique to their use case. We also support thousands of existing open source models. So we have a plugin with Hugging Face. We support Spacey, NLTK, all these popular libraries that allow you to start from whatever starting point they already have and build on top of the work that's already been done.
That's great. And so for those of you who are listening and don't know, Hugging Face is a library of pre-trained models that you can apply. Is it just in NLP, Ivan, or is it other areas as well?
I believe their focus and expertise is in NLP, but they certainly have a lot of other models as well. So it's worth checking them out.
Got it. That's great. And so it really allows someone who creates a project to, rather than reinventing the wheel with, like what you said, start at a baseline and focus on the novel innovation.
Yep.
As you move more and more into audio, what are the challenges of transcribing speech to text? You shared a clip earlier where I noticed there was a bit of an accent and background noise. I guess what's happening in the next gen of voice recognition to account for those types of things?
Yeah, well, we just have, I think at a base level, it's important to just call out that that is happening, right? So we do have customers who are labeling basic things like background noise, or this is a car horn in the distance, or this is a cat meowing. And being able to just isolate and separate that out helps the AI begin to understand and remove that from their determination of what's actually going on. Accents are really important, right? In the English language, there are many different ways to pronounce there are many different accepted ways to pronounce the same words. And so it's important for accessibility to a broader audience to make sure that our home assistants can understand regardless of all these other factors that might come into play.
So talking about inclusivity, there's a demand for, making AI tools available to a wider audience. What steps are you guys taking to make your application more accessible?
So I think when it comes to NLP, there's one thing in particular that really stands out. We've talked about how there have been so many advances in NLP over the last decade. The majority of that research has been done primarily for English and Mandarin, because that's where all the researchers are based. So one of the really powerful things that we're doing with DataSore is the ability to support any language on the planet. And so we're seeing customers come in from around the globe looking to build a pretty basic and foundational NLP capabilities for their language and their country. We take for granted that an AI should be able to understand things like Chase or State Farm or Bank of America, right?
Right.
But what about the common household brands in Venezuela or Croatia? There's a lot of low-hanging fruit to be done to make sure that NLP is being leveraged in all these other countries around the world. So I think there's a democratization of the technology and just making sure there is a baseline NLP model for every language on the planet.
That's great. And what are the kind of technical features that enable, it sounds like a challenging technical problem to be able to support every language. I mean, I'm just thinking about like Arabic, how does that work?
Yeah, so I can talk about some of the obstacles we came up against. So there are some scripts that actually don't have spaces. So in NLP, there's something called tokenization, where you assume that the words are broken down into spaces. But in some languages, those spaces don't naturally exist. And so we have to be able to break things down without using those as guideposts. You mentioned Arabic. That was another big challenge for us because the script goes from right to left. And we had assumed in our database that everything is indexed from left to right. So it took us a month of work, but now we support that as well. And actually now there's not a language we haven't found a language we don't support at this point. But it was really important for us to make sure that our software was inclusive of all languages.
That's amazing. Ivan, I wish I had more time, but I think we need to wrap up. Are there any, I wanted to leave a bit of space for you to make some final comments or, touch on topics that maybe I didn't think of or we didn't cover. So are there any final comments you'd like to make?
No, Ed, I think overall this has been great. Really appreciate the ongoing partnership with you and CloudFactory. We've been working together for years. I think overall, NLP is just a really exciting space, sometimes a little bit underserved and overlooked relative to the advances being made in computer vision. But I really think this is going to be a powerful technology that's going to transform our day-to-day experiences through the end of the decade. So excited to see what we can support moving forward.
Absolutely. And we look forward to continuing to work with you guys at DataSore. You've been very supportive of us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.